Third time's the charm. There we go. Oh, it's
yes, there we go. Third time's a charm.
We're in.
We're live. Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us on Recruiting EQ Wednesday at noon EST. Good evening or good morning if you're not in the EST. Episode 22. I have my lovely friend Shannon Roach here with us. Hey, Shannon.
Oh, hi, Rick. How are you?
I'm great. It's a very rainy, stormy, ugly day in Toronto today.
It is. We're getting the tail end of Beryl, and he brought with him a deluge of, yeah, absolutely. And so we're expecting like hours of this crap. Great. Great. I think my lawn needs it, so it's fine.
That's it. I'm down on Queen Street, and it was kind of flooded. It's less flooded now, but it floods a lot over here. Yeah. Good stuff. Hopefully
can't hold up the TTC. No.
Nope. Hopefully it's not flooding wherever you guys are listening. I know that certain of you will be joining as we go. So today's topic for Recruiting EQ is what gives recruiters a bad name. Dun dun dun. Gonna hit on all the super juicy, terrible, hot gossip, rumors, half truths, full truths about the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I'm really happy. And Shannon, you and I talked about this sort of like off and on from every conversation we've had. These things have come up.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, one of the things that we can agree on is like, why is it so broken? Why is it so hard? And, sometimes it's our fault and sometimes it's not. And, I think there's a lot of ways that we don't help ourselves. And so I'm hoping today, I think we could have taken the easy route and just opened the recruiting hell subreddit and started just reading stuff. But I think instead we've probably done a better job of consolidating what the key gripes are, and then what we're hoping will be the key solutions and things that recruiters can do, things that candidates can do, and maybe even sprinkled in there are little things that like hiring managers can kind of help themselves with as well.
Hot topics. So, and I'm sure. We'll get into it for sure. And for anybody who doesn't normally join us and is joining us today, we solve all the world's problems on this podcast in an hour over lunch, and so everything about this will be 100% solved. Just kidding. Definitely don't have answers, but we are thinking it through, and we would love your feedback. So the format for this here, just so you know, Shannon and I are not in LinkedIn. We're on a third-party app, so we do not see your full reactions and comments. However, we will see the gist of your comments. If they're long, they get cut off. But otherwise, please do comment. Bring your pet peeves, gripes, stories. Maybe you've been the victim of recruiter stigmatization unfairly, perhaps in your travels. We'd love to hear them. We will address your comments. And because this is going out live to LinkedIn and YouTube and will be on Facebook as well, in the interest of privacy, we are not going to name you in your comments as well. So we're just gonna stick to the content, and it will be super awesome. So that disclaimer and whatever said, Shannon, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm so grateful to be here again. This is something fun. I think you've started something in me that I want to get more on video and less writing because people apparently don't like reading. So I'm right. I'm Shannon Roach, and my company is Recruition Talent Services. We are a talent advisory, executive search, and technology recruitment firm. Essentially, we play in all of North America, serving clients both in the technology vertical, so that's tech, where technology is the source of revenue, and as a horizontal across all business lines. And so we've been around since 2018. We've been in the business for 10 years before that, but really it's been an obsession in the last few years, since these last couple of economic cycles, that has really wanted me to initiate change. And so I think we can elevate talent acquisition as a practice across the board, both internal, external, agency side, because I think everybody in the world can agree that the current systems, access to information, and processes have made it broken. We're commoditizing people, we're commoditizing services, and I think we can do better. So this is part and parcel of that sort of heartstring tug for me to have those conversations about what is broken and what are we going to do about it.
And this is a perfect segue, although we won't dive in just yet, to why we're talking about this today, right? Which is very much the perception of what's broken, what's actually broken. And I appreciate that, because I agree with you. I think that there's so much has changed, and the quicker we can lean into all of the challenges and talk about them as opposed to just crossing our fingers and pretending it will go away, the better. There's a couple things though, Shannon. I mean, before we dive into the topic of the day, you are somebody who was working in agency, who has now chosen to leave being an employee and start your own business in tech recruitment as a woman in tech recruitment, which famously has its challenges.
Yes.
How, like, what motivated you to start your own business? How has it been? How do you feel that being a female CEO of your own company has changed the game for you as in tech? How do you feel about the whole thing?
Yeah, so great questions. The first part is like the women, just being a woman in tech, and I think that's like the hard part. Sometimes we have a tendency to face a bit of an uphill battle when it comes to things like just establishing ourselves as sort of like deserving of a seat at the table. And I think for a lot of years, I actually had an identity crisis about whether or not I considered or qualified as a woman in tech because I'm not a coder. And I think that is part and parcel of the some of the issues that we face is that we get diminished sometimes, like the systemic biases that exist against sort of women in tech, newcomers to a specific jurisdiction or geography, people with language barriers, things like that. We tend to hold higher standards, and this is just one of those ways that sort of discrimination presents itself, and we see that in hiring processes as well. We're going to go and really deep dive, female candidates in tech, and we tend to place them instead in tech adjacent roles. So they're not the software engineers, they're the testers, and they're not the security engineers, they're the risk analysts or the audit folks. Like, these are some of those things that we're going to see, I'm hoping, shift, but it also contributes to the wage gap between the genders and things like that. And it wasn't until my last agency, we were sort of said, Shannon, get over that. Like, you are a woman in tech, you are in the tech industry, you're speaking tech language to all sorts of people. You don't code. That's not your limiting, that's not your limiting factor. And so then, just understanding how I have to position myself as a saleswoman, especially now that I am an entrepreneur, and position myself to sort of technical heavy hitters in the industry. And, I can't just walk in and start talking technical jargon, but I am also trying to overcome some of the stigmas that says, obviously this was a few years ago, pre-kids, a little younger, a little cuter, where it's sort of like, she gives the girlfriend experience, and that's why she gets clients and does well in sales and things like that. Because that...
It's not okay to say things like this to people in business. Just
you'd think so, but like, that was the assumption, is that, she took that guy to the Jays game, so, of course he's going to be a new client. And, that's not, and that's not it at all. And learning to even how to deal with candidates and how to ask questions and probe and all that, when I'm not the technical expert, but, I have a really, I would say, strong ability to sniff out some BS from a mile away. And so sometimes it's like, explain it to me like I'm 5, mansplain me all you like. But let's make sure that you've got a comprehensive grasp of the concepts and material that you're professing to have. So finding your way there is always going to be a challenge, and there's always going to be that sort of narrative. And I will say this: there's no substitute for excellence. There's definitely no free handouts. You have to learn, and you have to be able to sort of fight your way through. So,
So do you find that there's been changes for the better, for the worse, in terms of that stigmatization? Just in terms, I mean, obviously, I'm not asking you to speak on behalf of all women, of course, but in your own experience, do you feel like there's improvement there, or do you feel like there's just new, different stigmatization of women in tech than there was before as the technology? Like, how do you feel about how it's evolved?
Oh, leaps and bounds. Like, I think we're just doing, and if for no other reason than, I know lots of people, they've got mixed feelings, and it's a very sort of controversial topic to talk about things like diversity. And diversity in tech is very different. We speak more about gender diversity, ability diversity, things like that, than we do about racial diversity, although that is still incredibly prevalent, and the systemic barriers that exist for racialized people is, absolutely still in existence. But we also have, in Canada especially, and in the Toronto market, which is kind of where I grew up, we have an incredibly diverse city, and we are a very immigration friendly country. And so we were piloting in, tech professionals specifically from other parts of the world. And so we were very well represented on tech teams within sort of the Greater Toronto area to begin with. But as far as like for women in tech, I think the conversations that we were having pre-pandemic, and I am sorry to see that the post-pandemic sort of layoffs that we saw, diversity programs were among the first that were chopped. And that really hurts because we were having good conversations around, we're not saying you have to hire women into technical roles. What we're saying is that the resume screening, the cast a wide net and go through an elimination process to identify a workable set of candidates has a tendency to eliminate unfairly and on for kind of irrelevant reasons female candidates specifically and people of color. And I think that is one of the things. So the issue was women just weren't getting interviews. And so, of course, this just feeds into that narrative from hiring managers who are saying, like, we'd love to hire a woman, but, there doesn't seem to be any. And it's like, well, that woman took 2 years off and has worked for a year at her, to have a kid or what have you, and has now been back in the workforce for 2 years. And you're only crediting her as if she has 2 years of experience instead of like the 8 years that she brought, from her pre-maternity development experience. And so those women in technical roles are falling off before. And so when we're having those discussions, we're saying, if you make it an endeavor to make sure that you interview a woman for each truly technical role, and you make sure that you interview a person of color, and you do your best to try and find, it's difficult to, people don't generally identify disabilities on a resume, but make sure that you're trying to be as diverse as possible and are seeking out viable candidates with those particular demographics. What was happening is that a lot of these companies were like, wow, she did surprisingly better than we thought she would, because, on paper, this guy looked much better, but, as it turns out, the resume, it can't actually encapsulate a person's skills, abilities, and unique experiences. It is a piece of paper. And so I think we'll probably talk about that in a little more detail today. But I think the big thing is that leaps and bounds has been the progress, because when we became aware of it, you would catch people checking themselves, and not just because I'm a woman in tech and they were saying, oh my gosh, and I hope I didn't offend you by that. There was some of that as well, but it's sort of like, no, I understand, that's fair. The fact that you caught yourself is great. I want to commend you and congratulate you on checking your bias. So
that's great. That's definitely, I think, a much better reaction to respond like with positive reinforcement than some people would be like, I am offended and screw you. It's like, if the person is willing to improve, then let's push them in that direction instead, right? And like be like, yes, you did the right thing by apologizing. Maybe next time try not to say the bonehead thing instead.
Right, exactly.
But,
we see this a lot across like sort of all of the marginalized groups. And what's interesting is that those categories of people are becoming more visible, and so we're starting to realize like, wow. And it's very easy, in our own privilege sometimes to be like, oh my gosh, everybody's offended, everybody has their own unique set of needs, blah blah blah, and to kind of roll it off the back. But I also think that at the same time, when you're having a conversation human to human with these people, and you recognize, you're like, I don't actually want to hurt your feelings, I don't want to be inconsiderate in my privilege and misgender you or say something that sounds like inherently biased, the humanization component is going to be, I'm I'm literally hinting at the thesis of this entire talk today.
Exactly.
The human to human component is there.
Human to human component, 100%. Well, thank you for that, Shannon. You raised an interesting point too, which is, I think, something that a lot of people don't necessarily get, is that if you cast a wide net, what you're getting is a reflection of the way things are. And if we're saying that things are systemically sort of biased the way things are, well, those biases will just be reinforced in the wide net that you have. So this is the true argument behind wanting to make sure that you interview diverse candidates. And I think that's a good example, right? As opposed to some people will turn around and say like, oh, well, now you're privileging those candidates. It's like, well, no, you're not privileging them. It's just a wide net is reflective of the current situation and the past situation. And if we're going to change it at all, then we have to do something different in the first place to set the precedent in order for
absolutely. It also assumes, can we just talk for a half a second? When you take a wide net of parameters or cast a wide net, and then you're using what is considered an ideal profile, oftentimes that is the lived experience of the sort of upper middle class, well-educated, sort of like white dude, and like domestically born. And that is, and we don't actually have a lot of proof that says that is actually superior to then people who have more diverse backgrounds. So maybe who went to more unknown colleges, or were educated internationally, or went to different, worked in different environments and all those big name sort of tech shops. And, we'll get in, I think when we get into the why and we start unpacking why we see those behaviors present in things that everybody kind of universally hates in the marketplace as far as recruiter behavior. It's these things that are going on behind the scenes, and we can delve into those a little bit later. But yeah. The unintentional idea of what good looks like is really upholding a very one-dimensional standard that hasn't actually played out as being any better than, and any more elevated, other than to sort of reinforce some of those socioeconomic barriers and sort of disparities.
Yep, for sure. They're based on past, like you're saying, past experience, and past experience, if we're recognizing has existed on a bias, then we're just propagating the bias by saying that let's look to the past for what works. So it's a catch-22, right? And it keeps us stuck. I just want to shout out to the people who are saying hi, hello, all, hello. As we said earlier, unfortunately, we will not name you just because in the interest of privacy, we're not naming anybody. But thank you for being here. Please put in your comments and situations that you would like to talk about on this topic. We do have one comment here, which is interesting on the topic of women in tech and this whole thing, Shannon, right? When women interview as well, they may not want to work somewhere where they don't see themselves. So if an organization has no women in technical roles, they may feel like they are a token hire, which is, again, just sort of a sidebar result of all of this.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I don't want to go in and be the person who's treated at the table and then going to be spoken over, because it's sort of like, oh, well, you were the diversity hire. And so just sit there and look pretty, would you? We saw that actually in the executive ranks when we were first trying to get a lot of women elevated into the executive ranks. And then they would end up with like these invented portfolios. So you have your typical sort of like COO, VP HR, VP finance, all that stuff. And then you would have like, VP of strategic something or other that just sounded like a completely made up BS title. And it was sort of like, and that was like the token woman hire. And it was like, look at it, we have a woman on our executive on our board.
Yeah.
Hey,
cultural and clientele engagement professional. Just like an eight sentence title, and no one understands what you do, sadly.
Yeah, and that's why you have to look at all those metrics together, because then you say, okay, well, why is she making $100,000 less than all of the other guys at the same band?
They're not in the same band because we invented the position for it gets problematic.
You were the VP of basket weaving. Good for you.
Yeah, amazing. And you guys do basket weaving at this company? No.
No, we don't.
We don't okay, cool. Well, thank you for the comments. Keep them coming. We're going to get, I think, well into the juiciness of this conversation. I keep saying juicy. I hope that's not weird for anybody. But just like hot goss, right? Like there's a lot. I think we've all experienced this. I think it's amped up, not only since COVID, but since 2021 particularly, where lots of people were overworked and recruiters were people were just throwing recruiting jobs left, right, and center because the need was suddenly so great, mistakenly so, of course, because now so many people have been laid off. But that chaos, I think, has really turned up the volume on a lot of the negative stuff you see online of recruiters against recruiters, right? Stigmatized from candidates, from clients, from hiring managers. Recruiters are # the worst, I guess, or whatever kind of is the vibe in a lot of cases. You're feeling this too, Shannon?
Oh my goodness, yes. And what's really interesting is that it's reinforced and perpetuated by entire cottage industries that have been sort of broken out of this narrative. And I'm looking at, and again, there's some really great people who are doing things like career coaching, but I also see oftentimes things like the narrative that employers are evil, recruiters are stupid, and if you don't buy my resume writing course for $250, you ain't never getting past an ATS system because AI is against you.
You're right. What? There is a lot of that. People who have, especially in the past 4 or 5 years, especially since post-COVID.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody, I was saying in 2021, I was saying, because I have a music industry background, I was like, look, in 1991, everybody started a hip hop label. And in 2021, everybody started a recruiting agency. Everybody in their number started or became a recruiting agency. But we need to put career coach in there too, because everybody became a freaking career coach online, it seems, out of nowhere. And a lot of them sell based on negativity, being like, recruiters are dumb, clients are idiots. Here's the solution: $29.95 an hour.
Yeah, absolutely. Buy my resume writing course. You need coaching to be able. And what's interesting is that they go and they rile up people. And I follow a couple that I think have really, in my mind, sort of diminished their value proposition, because they went from talking about how to like promote yourself and plan your career and be strategic about how you hold yourself to a standard worthy of promotion into how do you fend off the bad guys. And it's this villainization of entire industries. It's fear-based selling. Frankly, I think it's predatory, because especially now that we have switched to a candidate-rich climate, and you're going to hear me say that a lot today, but candidate-rich climate creates a whole different, whole different set of problems for people who are job seekers. Yeah, for sure. But even for hiring, on the hiring side, it is. And this is where you really get to see, who's made of what. But unfortunately, it's not helped the recruitment industry, either on the agency side, but even internal talent acquisition, because a lot of times now we've been diminished as like resume readers. We've just been kind of brought back down. And so this idea that recruiters are just idiots and just the gatekeepers and you have to flow through. And I'm going to say there's a lot of parallels between our business and real estate, especially what's happened in the shifting market when you come to supply and demand cycles. And so in the real estate market, when, the demand was crazy, and if you could get a single listing, I mean, you could make 50 grand, like it was in outlying suburban communities. This is crazy. Yeah. And so everybody went and got the real estate license. And, we saw the same thing. Lots of recruitment agencies popped up, lots of real estate agents popped up. And then now that we're actually in a different climate, now that things are challenging, they're going back. The old dogs, like you and I, let's be real, we've been around for a couple of markets.
That feels like a badge of honor to me. But yes.
But now that we've been through these cycles before, and we've seen what it's like, and we understand that the problems that companies are trying to solve in hiring in a candidate-rich climate means that all the tools that everybody thought constituted the entirety of recruitment have been rendered useless. And again, we go back to that cast a wide net. There's too much noise, too much access. But let's really get into how does this present on the day to day? Because what does this mean?
I'm going to just read the one comment that came in before we close it off fully here, which is the amount of layoffs in the market is way too high and people incorrectly blame recruiters. I agree with that. Just sort of echoing what you're saying there, Shannon, too, is that a lot of blame placed on recruiters for that. Recruiters can't screen every single resume. We have to find creative ways to stand out from the crowd. I mean, it's just a problematic scenario of a candidate-rich market, for sure. And thank you for that.
Absolutely. Honestly, like this one is, I just want to hit on that particular comment because it does segue nicely into what happens next. And that is, it is the volume. So we're talking about the volume, and recruiters cannot screen every single resume. I'm going to go out on a limb and say we can. And that's where some of the 6 seconds is all the eyeballs you're ever going to get on your resume kind of myth comes from. That's a half truth. That's not entirely untrue, because there are times that I open a resume, I look at it, and I see gas station attendant, and you're applying to a senior developer job, and I'm like, why did you apply to this? So,
it's completely irrelevant, and there is a lot of that, more and more.
So much, and this is where the tools can work against us, and we almost need like an honor system. If you don't like the product of noise in the marketplace, don't use easy apply buttons. They are not your friend. Don't go tickety tick down to every single job listing.
Share with everyone in the world.
You're not getting found that way. This is not like, all the waitresses in LA who hope that somebody discovers them as an actor. That's not how that happens. So,
exactly.
No. So, so the volume is a big one. And I think if we were to jump right into like the biggest gripes about recruiters, the number one is ghosting.
Yeah. Being ghosted by a recruiter is something with so many endless memes. The memes are funny. I find them funny.
They're so good.
They're pretty funny, the ghosting. How do you feel about this, Shannon? This sort of prevalence, like recruiters are just going to ghost you.
So, okay, here's the thing that I struggle with the most on the ghosting front is the definition of ghosting. So, if you've had contact, touch points, an interview with a company, then you are due closure in some form. That's just how, if you've spoken to a live person, what I see a lot of though is, and you have to think of the mechanics of how recruiters will go through a huge list of applicants as an example, and this is where I'm already starting to get into like defending ghosting, and that's not what I want to do. What I'm saying is that if at any given point you've had a conversation human to human, you should never be ghosted. You should have somebody who sends, even if it's a thanks but no thanks email, even if it's something, but you should have closure on that. What I think we're getting swept up in is a lot of people who think recruiter sends a thing, says, hey, liked your profile, thanks for your application, would love to schedule a chat, please provide me with some times. And it takes a candidate 3 days to get back to them with some times. And then they never hear from the recruiter again. And then they're saying, well, where did that recruiter go? And it's sort of like, I hate to tell you, but you have to assume if you are one of 400 applicants, when the recruiter's going through their list, they're sending you sort of like auto shortlist emails. And sometimes those workflows are embedded into like ATS systems. So they put you on shortlist, but they have to keep paring down that list. You were in the top 5 applicants, so you got added to shortlist and that email was automatically sent to you. Yeah. And if you didn't respond right away and you didn't have such a compelling, and here's going to be, I think, a key differentiator. You didn't have such a compelling profile that the recruiter instantly picked up the phone and started calling you. And instead there's a chance that was also an automated workflow. And if that never happened, I'm sorry, I don't necessarily consider that ghosting. That's almost like your profile was flagged for future consideration. And sometimes those emails get sent out and then, they get later in the stack and they realize they've got much stronger talent lined up. So there's kind of reality, like ugly realities that happen just on the managing this incredible volume of candidates that happens.
Totally. The volume, I think, cannot be understated. And I think that needs to be, I know that there are because when there's such a high volume, it also often means that there are a lot of people who are looking, who are unemployed. So I get that there's in some cases, I don't want to use the word, but even a desperation quotient to it there, where it's like the stakes are high for some people. So I don't want to belittle that. But I do think that it needs to be pointed out that it is difficult to keep up with the sheer volume of candidates that are out there, period. And that it's often not this malicious thing where someone is sitting down proactively ignoring somebody, being like, screw that guy or gal or whatever. It's not really that. I mean, if they're doing that, then they shouldn't be in this business. But, right. That would be really rare. Like, for the most part, we want to do this. We want to make placements, no matter whether we're in-house or not. Right?
Yeah, exactly. We want to close these things off for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and I've got another comment here. I just want to hit it here. Oftentimes people consider it ghosting if you aren't able to get back to them as fast as they'd like. And that's the other thing, is those expectations. Again, if I look at a profile and it gets put into a shortlist bucket and there is an automatic process about send me your availability for a screen, or would like to take this further, and that happens, I think the assumption is that we're sitting there waiting for that response. I hate to tell you, I'm 30 applicants past you now. And these are those things that, like, there is an understanding that there's logistical limitations and mechanics and all that stuff. If we had to adjust things, so for anybody who has the ability to adjust those workflows within your ATS system, I do say this, I love automated workflows, but you have to be careful and setting them up super carefully so that these things don't happen. Because again, to the candidate, and we talk about candidate experience a lot, to the candidate, it looks like they got a personalized, hi, my name, I loved your profile, thanks for your application, and I had just sent that in. It looks like I've got somebody who's waiting right there. So for them to then say, I'm not getting back to you for however long, for a day or 2 days or what have you, those expectations, you've set those expectations by sending that automated or auto-generated email, or by initiating that. The clock in their mind has started. And so they are waiting. And so to the last comment about their expectations and timing, it is so important that if you are using automated workflows, that you even maybe flag it. This is an automated workflow. You were added to a shortlist. Congratulations. Could you please provide us your availability for a phone screen later this week? I don't think that would ruin the candidate experience as much as having them think that you emailed them and then didn't get back.
There's a trend that I find good that I hope becomes part of this sort of online etiquette, or whatever you want to call it, of this kind of stuff, is to sort of, if it's video content or whatever else, to sort of start with an apology. Sorry for the bulk email, but I have a large number of people to get through, and it's just genuine, right? It's just being very genuine and saying like, hey, listen, sorry, this is a bulk email, but I need to get through a lot of people. This is what we're doing. This is the project, and so on. Just that genuineness can at least set the expectation where it's not like you're like, I am bulk email, and then turn people off. Like, you can still be human about being open about the fact that you're doing a sequence,
Exactly. And I think, the transparency process, and just think about what would it look like from your side if you had lost your job, you're under
Yeah.
a lot of anxiety because you're worried about paying your rent, paying your mortgage, feeding your family. These are like very real, and you have to understand that your audience is in such a vulnerable state in their life
Yeah.
and in their career. So um waiting is the worst part in the entire process. And so if you
Sure.
send them this automated email, they give you an auto like instant response and you don't action that right away, they're waiting with bated breath at their camera like, I'm just waiting to schedule this thing, like, sorry, I can't do that, I can't take that phone call because I'm waiting, this person's going to call me any second. So this is what it says, it's got to be the smart use of technology, and we have to look at things and that empathy side from the candidate perspective and experience first. But I think this is a lot of why the volume, I think, is the number one reason for ghosting. Now here's where we're going to let's get juicy for a second on ghosting. And I posted about this yesterday, actually, because I was thinking about it. So I was like, oh, I'm posting this. And that is, if you've interviewed and you're not getting feedback, the answer is no. And yeah. And so this is a really challenging one. Should you be due like a feedback? Absolutely. And now I might have a whole bunch of people here who are like, hold on, I had this company that went through 3 extra weeks of interviews. They wanted to interview everybody at that stage before they decided he was going to move forward and things like that. I wanted to shed some light on what happens behind the scenes. And this is where, if you've got recruiters who are submitting candidates to a hiring manager, internal, agency, it doesn't matter, and they submit candidates to a hiring manager and the hiring manager is not providing feedback.
Yeah.
What's usually happening is you've got a hiring manager who says, this person looks viable. They've got, like, they meet all the keywords and all of the sort of must-have requirements that are usually limited to technical skills on a resume. I met them hoping for all of those soft skills and fit and spark and like connection and excitement, something to really get me excited about this person as a candidate in the interview. And I didn't get that. Yeah. And yet I don't know. I think we could do better. I'd like to keep looking, but I don't actually know that we can do better. And in case we can't, I'd like to keep this person warm. And so what ends up happening is that, sometimes I'm going to blame hiring managers in this one. Sometimes hiring managers sit on that feedback. They don't provide feedback. They don't want to seem too picky, like, the guy didn't give you the warm and fuzzies, And so it's just a lack of communication. And then that lack of communication as they continue their search and continue working on the back end, while you're stuck in limbo land. I want to say it's not necessarily the fault of the recruiter. Recruiters, we all need to be better at helping our candidates retain their dignity and say, it sucks waiting. Like, you've just interviewed with this person, now you're waiting on. And so even if it's update, no update, we're still conducting interviews. They're going to tell us who their shortlist is shortly.
Yep.
And I think sometimes recruiters are afraid to say that because, especially agency side recruiters, they want to seem like they are that candidate's one and only agent, that they don't have 3 other candidates in the mix or 4 other candidates.
They're Terry Maguire. They're just repping them forever. It's like, show me the money. I'm going to go through hell for you. And
yeah.
For sure.
And they're hiding the reality of the process from their candidates. And so this is where it's sort of to say, like, the process is usually there's going to be a dozen people in the mix. The recruiter is going to, that are going to be at any given point sort of thrown at the hiring manager. Hiring manager might only interview 5. And, you are one of the 5, you aren't one of the 5. And the other thing that I think agencies are terrible for doing for their candidates is not telling their candidate when their profile is either not being submitted to the hiring manager or didn't get to interview status with the hiring manager, that the hiring manager selected the top 3 and you were not one of them. Doesn't mean you're out of contingent, like out of process yet. But so it's those communications that candidates find like just rotting their socks, because the lack of visibility is why they think that you've just lost interest and off you've gone, not that you're kind of hamstrung to a process that involves other people. And if anybody is listening and currently in the job market, always assume you're in competition. Never assume you're the only candidate. Even if they tell you you're my only candidate, no. Assume there's somebody else in the back burner. Always.
Minimum 1, yeah.
Minimum.
Yeah, no, it's true. And it's difficult on the front that you touched on there, Shannon, with the submit to hiring manager, and then sometimes the hiring manager ghosts you there and you don't get any feedback as to why. Sometimes, people are being very picky because of the high volume and whatever else. So there might be, I'm going to select these 3 people and the other 2 I'm not selecting without much of a reason why. And so it's these vagaries and stuff like that. So I find that it's good to set expectation with candidates right away of saying, like, there's a lot of different profiles they're looking at for this kind of thing. I think you're a great fit. I will submit you, and if you're selected, I'll let you know. And if you're not selected, if you're not selected, well, then we have to assume that you weren't a fit. But there's a lot of people I feel who insist on feedback. Why? Why wasn't I selected? Well, because you weren't as good as the other resumes. Well, what are the other resumes? Well, I don't know. I don't see them all. It's hard. So, but I feel like setting these expectations and doing that at the beginning helps people not feel like you're ghosting them later when you yourself are just not getting it.
Yeah. And I get it. Like, for each candidate who's in a process, it feels like your process is your process, that you get evaluated on your own merit in complete isolation and go through the process in what should be a very linear trajectory of sort of milestones, the gauntlet of the Rube Goldberg machine that is elimination by volume. And so, like, these sorts of things, like, I know that feels the way it is for you, but on the flip side, if you're in the hiring manager's seat and you have this buffet of choice and you say, I want to try the salmon before I decide if I'm going with a bigger piece of beef. Like, I think this is that situation. You forget what that looks like. And so they're taking their sampler first sometimes and actually pausing the entire interview process. And in those situations, it is terrible to it is terrible to be the first guy to interview, because then you're waiting. And then, when you're the girl who was interviewed last and you get that call back right away, you're like, oh, that's awesome. And you think that is now the pace of the process. And now you're in second round. So now you do the technical round. Those are often harder to schedule because they usually involve more people. There's all these components and challenges that can draw out a process. So just because you got an instant turnaround on step 1 doesn't mean step 2 is going to be any faster. Yep. And again, it's really the recruiter's job is to be a conduit of information for both sides. You need to deliver the candidate the information they need to evaluate the opportunity, and you need to deliver the client the information they need to evaluate the candidate, make sure there's a good fit, and try and piece it all together. But that also means that information also means helping both sides understand the process. And we can touch on that a little bit later when we get more into solutions and stuff. But I think just to address the ghosting is recruiters, especially if you've talked to somebody, be better. This is pick up the phone, send the one-liner. I don't care. Be better. If you've had a conversation with somebody, close it off. Speaking of automated workflows, even if it's a thanks but no thanks email that happens when you move them into the reject column in your Kanban workflow, anything, just you have to close it off with people. We have to do better as an industry.
Yeah. You acknowledge this comment for a second too. If someone had written that they had instances where the hiring manager was ready to hire, but then when found the candidate faster than expected, everything had to be put on hold. And I guess the person who doesn't know about it, that they found somebody, quicker or whatever through other means. So everybody's in the pipeline for months. I mean, that kind of lack of communication from a client. Shannon, do you want to be the one to say how terrible that is?
It is. I literally, this person, I feel like you were just involved in my last process. We went through this.
Oh, no.
It was this big one, and it was sort of hurry up. And, the process had been open, on their side before they decided to go to agency, had been open for a long time. And so by the time they come to me, they're like, I needed this guy in Q1. We're in Q3. You got to help. And I'm like, okay, here we go. Guns a-blazing, all resources on deck.
Yeah.
And so we did, and we turned around the first submission in 3 days or something. And this was an executive search, so that was a really quick turnaround, but did some instant networking. And anyways, but then it was hurry up and wait. We scheduled the first phone screen with the exec, and the second round was going to be with other stakeholders from the business side. And that took, that was already kind of 2 weeks out, and then there was vacations, and then there was travel and things like that. And when it all came out, it was oh yeah, we had another candidate in process that we found. And my instinct, being in the sort of blind agency partner side, was sort of and at what point did the candidate enter the process? Did your internal referral, kind of step in? And again, there's going to be fumbles. Let's be real. Pro footballers, they fumble, we fumble too. And those were situations where, because of the access, and it was a relatively new relationship, I wasn't as comfortable being psycho dialing, this executive client for for feedback. So sometimes you are at the whim of, somebody who's holding up or a bottleneck in the process. And that is kind of the nature of the beast, but that shouldn't happen as often as it does, or as often as we're kind of letting it. If you've got an excellent relationship and sort of like transparent communication tunnel with both clients and candidates.
Yep. Well
said. The other comment, hurry up and wait. Yep, that's it. There it is. We see that for sure. Okay, this is the one that I think we kind of teased in all of the socials and stuff like that. Bullying. Recruiter grapes that the world hates. Bullying. Thugging your candidates into a role. I'll tell you something. In 15 years, I've had one fall off, and I thugged the candidate into a role, and I learned a lot. I'm not proud of it. I was
only fall off?
I've had one.
Wow. My ratio was low, but I've had more than one.
I'm slow though. I'll just put it out there. I'm slow. I'm methodical. Yeah. I'm slow. But yeah, I had one fall off, and it was like entirely my fault. But I think where it comes from, and we can talk a little bit later about power dynamics, but it comes from this concept that the company and thereby the recruiter has something that the candidate wants, and therefore they try to establish themselves as being the one in the position of power, and it's all about regaining and controlling that power. The term within agency is candidate control. Mm-hmm. I hate this term with every fiber of my being. It's so bad.
How do you really feel about it, man?
You're talking about a sovereign human. And this whole idea of you can control processes, you can control things, you cannot control people. Let's just get this out of our, you cannot control other people. What you can do is create an environment where it is acceptable for them to say no. And I think a lot of the times this concept of like thugging, almost like like they're trying so hard. The recruiter is putting on their sales hat. They're trying so hard to get to yes, that they're not slowing the process down to actually ask the candidate's opinion. And they're frankly commoditizing their talent. And they're not saying like, how do you feel about that? Based on this information I've given you. Yeah. What are your thoughts? And if you don't hold space for your people to say no, or hold on, that's a concern for me. Oh my goodness, we have just created this entire atmosphere. And I think this is the flips, like the opposing argument to the narratives that you see on social forums and things like that. That is the opposite end of the spectrum, but I don't know if it's more or less. This is what makes recruiters seem slimy. This is what makes it seem like we're lying, we're misrepresenting the job. It makes it seem like, we would just do anything to get somebody to accept this offer. We try to move too fast. It's the used car salesman approach. And I will say that some of the trials or some of the learning curves of inexperienced recruiters where they just don't know, or they're unsure, or they're insecure, when they become more confident and it tends to turn into this like overconfident, I control the process, like flexing. And, the semi-okay recruiters who are entry level, who had the staying power to get through it, are the ones that I think turn into like the kind of the bullies, where they're not actually interested in making good matches. And we see it far more on the agency side, but we see it in-house as well. And that is this notion of candidate control. So I would love if somebody could have a comment, or like, this is where I would really want to open like the recruiting health thread. And I would love it if you have a story where you had a recruiter who tried to bully you into something, telling you that your concern was illegitimate, was not a big deal, that you'll figure it out when you get there, and really just trying to force you into accepting an offer. Maybe that wasn't as good. You told me that if I could get you this much money that you would accept. You promised. You don't have integrity anymore. Like, these are the things that I have heard from the marketplace.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Like,
it's bad. And you had mentioned an anecdote, Shannon, and I have had this happen too, and I think a lot of us have, where we're talking to a candidate about the same role as another recruiter is talking to them, and we listen to the way they pitch that same role, and sometimes we're just like, oh man, what the hell are you doing? Like, you're just pushing them out, and it's not a good match for X or Y or Z, like deal breaker reason, and we're just like, okay, wow,
Yeah. And it's a reminder of who my competition is sometimes. And I go, oh, all right then. You know? And one was my favorite, where the big gating issue was my candidate had moved out of the city and said, I can do, like, I'm currently doing at my current employer, I'm currently doing 2 days a week in the office, and I'm doing 3 days a week from home. And I refuse to do more. I would prefer to do less. And so if you're going to make me move, that is a gating criteria. And so then when I called this person, and they were in my network, and we were chatting about who had called them first, and I guess the search had gone out to a different agency first, because again, new client. And they said, oh, this person contacted me months ago for this one. And they said, oh, it's not a problem. They can do 2 days a week. And I'm going, this is one of the most visible companies for being hard asses on return to work. And there is no chance.
You're not doing 2 days a week.
Chance of doing 2 days a week.
That's a rough one. How are you not going to get caught in a lie there? Like, come on, man.
Right. And I almost think that sometimes sometimes recruiters, agency side recruiters, especially like account managers and salespeople, have this idea that they can make the client fall in love with the candidate, and then the client will bend because they're just so desperate for the right person. And it's like, not when it's.
Yeah, in very rare occasions that's happened, but certainly now less so. I feel like it's very navel-gazy, right? It's very like the candidate control idea is very much like, okay, well, that's a candidate, especially in split desks. It's like it's a very not 360 way of thinking, I find, because in split desk, you're like, I'm an account manager. This is your candidate. Go get this guy for me for this job because my client's going to want that guy.
Yeah.
No consideration as to whether or not what the person's life is, or if this is a good step for them for X or Y or Z reason. It falls on the recruiter to somehow convince them to go out because the account manager is telling them, I need that guy at my client because his profile is what my client wants. And we're not considering what the candidate wants. And vice versa. You'll have the candidates like, oh my God, you have this job open. It's perfect for me for all these reasons. They don't know better, obviously, because they don't know the client. But in their head, it's the perfect thing. Meanwhile, at the client, so they're pushing the account manager saying, hey, you got to get me out to this job. But there might be legit reasons. And the bullying goes multiple ways that way. And I think it's from this disjointed idea where we're not actually thinking about both sides. It's a good idea for people on both sides.
Yeah. But this, again, we like anybody who's listening, especially if you're new in the industry and you have somebody who parrots that same language about candidate control, I want you to just stop and think for a half a second and say, can you control other people? And the fact is that as sovereign individual humans, no, you can't. You can control. Actually, amazing comment. Oh, Rick, read this one out. Do you see this?
Let's do it. Yeah. I think you can control the controllables, i.e. transparency of details, i.e. making sure the salary and location are acceptable on both sides, client and candidate, but not the gut feel. That's the human element. A bit like buying a house. On paper, you might want something, but then when you view it, it doesn't feel right. Same with accepting a role. Yeah, there you go. Well put. Thank you.
That is it. That comment?
Nameless person who's one of our resident big shots at Raymond George.
There you go. Oh, okay. So there. I didn't know that.
Subtle plug.
Amazing.
Oops.
You know what? Okay, so again, I want to touch on that real estate parallel again, because here's one of those things. So I've got a lot of friends who are like realtors and things like that, and they'll say like the worst is first-time home buyers when like I would say 80% of like first-time home buyers who've been poring over magazine-worthy, like purposeful design and vignettes of like these beautiful old houses and things like that. And then they go onto MLS and they see like empty boxes that are new construction, suburban tract homes. And they're like, we don't want that. We want character. But what they mean by character is, they want that century home, but they also want all the modern amenities. So they want ensuite bathrooms and walk-in closets and, these cavernous kitchens that overlook grand living spaces that are multi-purpose. Those things retrofit into century homes cost millions of dollars, and that's not usually a first-timer's budget. So what ends up happening, like what you ask for and what you get, are very different things. So what they end up hiring, or what they end up buying, is usually like a modern tract home, but that had molding added to it. So
it's like to give it that character.
Buyers are liars, man. It's this idea that you think you want something different. It's what they want is something that looks finished and nice to live in. And not necessarily, but the same thing happens with recruiting is that sometimes you have, client intakes, and they're like, I want this and I want that, and they want, certain results, and they need to be brought down a little bit about this, like, what does that look like on a resume? And then the flip side, and I think in the pandemic era, when talent was scarce and there was a lot of uncertainty and there was a war for hiring, especially in tech talent, people are like, man, I will take a dwelling. Like the answer was, I will take somebody who can code in Java, and if you can find me, I'll hire them. And then we go through these processes, and you realize, okay, maybe I need a little bit more than that. But what they're actually looking for is somebody who can contribute on the workload. And if you don't qualify those intakes at that point, like early on in the process, there's a misunderstanding and a misalignment about what do we need. And I do have to say that, just reverting back to the thugging and the issues with generic casting a wide net, is that job descriptions almost never capture what the company actually needs. They are taking these big, beautiful business objectives and distilling it down into a set of tasks that we can qualify with skills and keywords. And I got to tell you, AI can do this. That's sourcing. And it is not the whole thing. So even though you're like, I don't understand why I didn't get a call, I meet 100% of these requirements, and there's a lot of frustration on that basis, that that's not actually what the real requirements are. Just like the resume doesn't actually capture the entirety of a human being, it's a piece of paper. The flip side is also true. Resumes and job descriptions just suck. You can't do it. Sorry.
Yeah. I long for a day when they're less looked at actually in the job. Like a resume or a job description is not as looked at, but rather, having people like us bring in an actual sort of meta understanding of not only what's the culture like, what's the real need, what are the problems that need solving at the company, but how does that fit into their competitors and all this stuff, and then talk to someone who actually opens up to you and says, this is who I really am. And then you can go, I suggest you go here, here, and here. Like, just a much more like bespoke process. You said real estate. We can give people a bespoke process that should be worth zillions of dollars, free of charge anytime, as long as they just are honest with us.
I think this is where it comes to. And what's funny? Okay, so we should probably hit on like the last kind of recruiter gripe that we have, and we can choose like the candidate gripes too, because there's some things, candidates, that you're not doing to help yourself in your job search process.
Actually, you see. Okay, let's do it.
Yeah. Okay. So we talked about the thugs in recruiters, like recruiter land, and the flip side is the ignorant. We'll call them the noobs. Like, it's the new people. Let's be real. They're unsure of themselves, especially if you're just making that leap into something that's like outside of any domain knowledge or field that you have. Like when I first became a tech recruiter, I was like, I can't go talk to developers. I know nothing.
Yeah.
I hear you say Java, I think coffee. So that was like the extent of it. And one of the things that really took the pressure off is I had a mentor who was like, well, then ask your candidates.
Yes.
Just get comfortable getting on the phone and saying like, okay, I'm told that this is a requirement. What does that even mean? And have them educate you. And the learning curve is so incredibly steep. Anyways, but I think it's that lack of knowledge. And then we combine that with nobody likes to feel dumb. And so new recruiters, I think we have a tendency to posture a little bit because it doesn't feel good to get on the phone to say, I have the power balance because I have the thing you want, which is like the juicy job. And I'm going to get on and I have to evaluate you. And I know nothing about what I'm talking. And that makes me feel stupid and it's uncomfortable and I don't want to do it. So instead, I'm going to posture. I'm going to have ChatGPT write me some technical interview questions that I couldn't discern an answer from, and things like that. And, or they don't have the answer. And so they guess. And so instead of saying like, I don't know.
That's the worst.
Right. So it is just the human side fumbling, because it does take a degree of executive presence and self-mastery to have conversations with people who are experts in their field and in their domain, and to be professionally curious and uncover the information that you need by asking them to spoon feed it to you, to be able to render that decision and act as that conduit. That is our job. And I think that it usually presents at people who are sort of earlier in their careers. And it's this reason why the burnout rate in recruitment is so high. People don't like feeling uncomfortable. And so if you're talking to a recruiter who's been there kind of like less than 2 or 3 years, they may have climbed the mountain of stupid where they get a couple placements and think they're geniuses. And then they get that real earth shattering come back to earth when they realize that it's actually quite difficult to build connections with people out of thin air. And so the relationship, the human component is, it's a skill. It's a skill that we need to work on.
For sure. For sure. And that fear, like you're saying, of not wanting to look stupid also sometimes presents itself when it's a job you've never done and you don't really know what it is. You could read about it on paper forever, but you're like so closed up about really talking to the person about it that there's a part of you, you're not being as genuine. You're not going to, yeah, it's going to make it a lot harder.
Yeah. And I think, one of the big things, if we were to just quickly wrap that up and say like, okay, so that's the why is people are like, it is some uncertainty. It is some, it's also the fear of rejection and feeling like you're going to say no if, I give you the full details or the full goods on something. So, people sometimes like junior recruiters edit out information that they do have because it didn't align with what somebody said. I don't like things blowing up in my face. So bullies tend to have some of the highest fall off rates and the highest reject rates, like offer turn downs. And then the flip side is that junior recruiters tend to have the highest candidates just drop out of the process, ghosting, things like that. Because the recruiter's like, okay, you've kind of eroded my trust and we're out of here. I don't believe that you would actually do an adequate job of representing me to the hiring manager or to the client. So I'm just out. Like I can't. And so I think that, sorry, go on.
No, please go on.
Yeah. I just think that afraid of no, the uncertainty, that kind of uninformed and not sure how to, fear of rejection and not sure how to get that information for candidates without looking like they don't know after they've just postured as being in the know, and things like that. And this is where, I am hopeful, especially Rick, like we've talked about, I followed some of your past EQ, recruiting EQ episodes. And the one on the Gen Z really hit me. I think Gen Z is doing something really great. And that is that they've always been on display. They've always been around Facebook, around social. They do authenticity so much better than we do. And I am hoping that Gen Z recruiters will have that staying power because they will be more authentic with candidates and they will be less likely to do this posturing under the facade of being a knowledge worker and professional that us millennials were still coached in.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. And I was going to say too, I know that normally this is an hour long. We're at 4 minutes too, but there's no hard stop here. There's no hard stop. So we're probably going to go over. So anybody who, and that's fine. If you have to go, great. Get your comments in while you can. We will address them. You can watch the rest of this. It is pre-recorded, so it'll be online afterward. Shannon, if you're able to stick around a few minutes longer, it'd be good to go through some of the recruiter ones. Okay, great. Just to address a couple of people have thanked us for being so awesome. So thanks for thanking us. And then we have one comment, which is the challenge. The challenge is also that often people are writing a JD based on previous employee, like a previous employee, and not actually evaluating what the purpose of the need is, where it fits into business, the purpose of the role today, not a year ago. Starting and really thinking, writing a JD from scratch is always best. I mean, this comes back to what you were saying before, Shannon, too, about like, getting an ideal fit based on past quote unquote bias, what worked in the past. You end up getting gender bias, you end up getting, lack of diversity, and change. You also end up getting lack of new problem solving for new problems that may have arisen from what that situation was for the past person. So yeah, there you go. You have all that.
Oh yeah. And the thing is that like, okay, why did that person leave? Oftentimes people are leaving not just for great opportunities, but sometimes because there's been so much scope creep in their job and they're going, I don't love what my job has evolved into, which means if you use that same job description to hire the next guy and that's not what the job is anymore, a lot of times this ties into recognition programs, understanding, performance programs, how you manage your people. And I also think, like, to that same comment, this is why doing a re-intake for every job every single time. The other thing is that sometimes you hire a transformational person who changes or shifts the dynamic of the team that you've hired them into. And, that's a big one. So sometimes you say, okay, well, we kind of filled that gap and that competency that we had when we hired the last guy. And so now we need to hire a new girl. And the new girl's job is going to be fulfill this either new gap or this new kind of function that has arisen as a product of, the change that we've gone through in the last year, which would be a truly new and unique headcount or requirement. So these adaptations, we see it, I think, more at scale, at scale up stage companies. So with each hire, like they're kind of pivoting a little bit. They don't want to hire 100 of the same. And well, they think they do, and they quickly learn the pitfalls of doing that. But if they can instead say, let's pause for a half a second and actually reevaluate what is the culture of this team, what is the nature of that environment or whatever, because there's always going to be a shift. And I think that does play a big role. So yeah, the not just writing JDs or regurgitating JDs based on tasks. I wanted to know, maybe anybody who's tuned in from internal or HR could comment, and that is, what is the relationship between a job description as posted in an ad and somebody's accountabilities internally? Because I've heard of case studies where people have used the ad that they replied to in job, like labor disputes, when they've gone to court and saying, well, these are my functions per the job description. And what we've always maintained is that a job ad is an ad. It is not an employment agreement. And same like a resume. It's, it's a marketing document. It is not a biography, and it does not need to be a chronological verbatim account of your work history. So these are things where, if somebody could comment on that, I would love that. So just to know. Okay.
Keep the comments coming, everybody. Okay, there's two more here that let's address, and then go into the candidate side of things, or the recruiter side. I always ask recruiters and realtors how many years of experience they have, and if it's less than 2 or 3, I'm too keen on. I guess I'm not too keen on working with them. Was implied there. If you work with a big agency, sit next to the folks 10 plus years experience. I mean, that last part for sure. It's tough. It's tough on the 2-3 years experience. I have clients too. I don't know if you feel the same way, Shannon. I have clients too who are just kind of like 2 years experience in recruitment. They're this, and I'm going to pay them this because they're 2 years in. I find it really changes from one agency to the next how well trained they are and how well they do. Some people have 5-6 years experience, and pardon me for saying this, they're garbage like at their job. I don't even blame them fully because they have 5-6 years experience, but they've never been trained well. So even that isn't enough sometimes. Here I am just shit talking recruiters. I'm sorry, but
philosophical about
it's going to be any good sometimes, sadly.
I think, let's tie it back into bad recruiter behavior is often a product of bad hiring processes. And the bad hiring processes is this idea that the process is sacred above the people. And when you say the process is designed to help us get to a decision, that's all it is. It is the Rube Goldberg machine of slapping and spinning and whipping and stretching like your candidates until you end up with somebody who's like viable. Or in a lot of cases, these systems, which were designed pre-industrial revolution, like when you would go to the town bulletin board with a handwritten job call for a baker's assistant, and you would take on an apprentice and they would live with your family, these are the sorts of things like that was this concept of you want to maybe you put it on 4 posts in town and cast a wide net and then eliminate whatever you get. And I think that one of the challenges we have with job descriptions is that we conflate skills and experience. And to your point, Rick, is that experience is a representation of opportunity, not necessarily skills. And we tend to assume the same thing. There is a huge difference between a senior level recruiter with 3 years of experience who's doing senior level work, design work, and things like that, and an intermediate level developer. Did I say recruiter? Designer.
Yes, developer. Yes.
I meant developer, but and an intermediate level developer who's doing nothing but kind of debugging blue collar code for 10 years and calls himself a senior. There's a huge difference there. And I think that understanding those nuances and those differences, and what does that look like? And I think the one thing I would love to see go away is like this idea that years of experience is equal to, the skills or the deliverables that you're looking for from the job. Why not just put the deliverables? Honestly, companies tend to treat this like some secret sauce. Like, I need somebody to go migrate our cloud from A to B, and here's going to be some of the challenges you're going to face. Have you done that before? Like, that's what I'm looking for. And instead we write things like 10 years of Java development experience and 5 years of PostgreSQL and 5 years in AWS and 5 years in GCP. And you don't have any idea about from or to or whatever. And, what the actual goal is and why is that driving business. And we don't ask for those things in job descriptions. So candidates, sometimes who have that exact experience, don't put it on the resume. Instead, they say 10 years of Java development experience. Like that's
that's it.
We're not speaking the language we need.
Yeah, and it's the expectation of what's supposed to go on that resume, right? Like you're saying, exactly. or what you shouldn't put that sometimes colors that.
Yeah. So okay, I want to get on the candidate side of things because here's where you guys don't help yourselves at all. And I've already touched on a couple of them. The number one is the mass apply, the easy apply button. Equal to that, especially if it's on LinkedIn, is the easy write a cover letter or send a message to the hiring manager or mark this as your top choice job or what have you. All of those automatic features, just so you know, the LinkedIn template just uses your headline. So if you've got one of those headlines that says, I help companies build software. And
like latte enthusiast, professional unicorn. Some of them are that
right.
color. Like, yeah.
So then when I get the LinkedIn auto-generated cover letter and it says, hey, I saw that you posted this job. I would love to connect. It sounds really interesting, blah, 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 and all these other things. Based on my experience as I help companies, professional unicorn, that's how it auto-populates. And I get like instantly when I post a job and I see all of those things come in, and I have to admit, guys, I post like 1% of my jobs, just because the people that I'm usually brought in for specialty search and for executive search, and it's just not a really high quality source of candidates for me. And so, but I would instantly get, I would say 30% of the applicants send me that exact same generic cover letter. And so when I see a cover letter come in that's different than that, that's not the same sort of opening line, at least I read it. And then sometimes I'll actually go find that person's profile. Because I'll be like, hey, you know what? You took the time. All right. If nothing else, I'm going to make sure that you get eyeballs on your resume.
Yeah.
So candidates, easy apply, not your friend. But I think, and this is, I think, the point we really wanted to make, Rick, was that the candidate gripes are actually, outside of that one, is identical to recruiter gripes. So we were sitting here brainstorming, what are we going to put as like the kind of the things that recruiters hate about sort of candidates? And it is the exact same thing.
It's 100%.
It is the ghosting. It is the misrepresentation, lying, uncertainty. I think you want this and I'm going to guess at it. So I'm just going to posture like I have it. And then the other part is the holding the cards close to the chest and not telling you the information that you need to know about me, because I'm trying to regain and hold some of that power in this like imbalanced sort of power dynamic for a job that I really want. It is identical. And so if we had to like wrap it here.
Yeah.
So what's the answer? How do we fix it?
Well, yeah, that's okay. Let's solve all the world's problems. I mean, at the end of the day, though, like you said, you've said it several times, that transparency and communication really comes down to it, and not being afraid of, not having to put on the posturing and all this stuff, right? What have you put in here as solutions? You've listed some solutions in our.
I did. I started to go in here, and what's funny, because I started to like hit them individually. Like maybe we do this, maybe we do that. I mean, and these are all sort of like good ideas to keep in mind. But if you had to have like a consolidated thesis, it's the humanization component. And there's a lot of myths out there about you send your resume into the ATS system and they just flag like the highest returned keywords of this particular keyword. And to a degree, that's there. That doesn't necessarily mean that those people get the job and that they hire from that job, unless the parameters for the job were pretty loose commodity hiring anyway. What ends up happening is that you'll get the ATS will spit out a short list. You'll have recruiters kind of go through, screen that. They get through that process. If they're not wowed, they don't usually go back to the pool of candidates. They repost the job. And so these candidates who are getting really frustrated with the market right now, that we're seeing is that I applied to your job once, and then I think I'm perfect fit because it's generic and I gave you my response.
Look at this thing. I'm perfect for it. Yeah.
Didn't even get a call. And now we see that the job is reposted. Why are you rejecting me? And again, this is where we are trying to commoditize and automate things that can't be automated. There is a human component, and that is the relationship side. And I think that's where we've missed. And so candidates on your side as well, stop trying to game the system and things like that. You need to learn how to network. I think if companies could learn how to pipeline and candidates could learn how to network, we could close down contingent staffing as an industry in 6 months.
Take that, contingent staffing. But I mean, look, it's a big swing, but I agree with you, because a lot of those processes are going to be automated. And I think you're onto something there, Shannon, in terms of, if people actually networked and were genuine and open with each other, and just open, right? Yeah. Like, then the power dynamic makes it that people are very close. Like you're saying, somebody wants to win. And in order to win, you got to play your cards a certain way and all this stuff. And on both sides, it's just a colossal waste of time. No one's winning. in that
No.
kind of at all.
And the worst thing is that now we've got, it's so bad and people are so like complaining about it. And, you know, we're starting to see, it's so funny. We're starting to see like the unemployment rate climb up to what have traditionally been historical norms, but we've just been so battered by incredibly low unemployment for such a long period of time. People are losing their minds. Like, oh, the bottom's going to fall out of the market. And you're like, no, this is healthy. This is normal.
Normal,
And so this is what I mean by some of the old dogs. We've seen these cycles before and we're like, what?
Not that bad. On paper, it's really not that bad, and yet
No, it's but the sentiment out there is terrible. And again, it's being fed and fueled by the echo chamber that is this like negativity cells and fear cells online. And so, you know, I think that one of the ways that we can do that is if you ever take a step back and you breathe and you're like, you know what, like there's a living, breathing human being on the other side of this piece of paper, and you know they probably have a story. And if I haven't given them good information, and you know their story is not going to be tailored to what I need. They're not giving me the information I need. So we need to do a better job of transmitting the information throughout the process so that we can arrive at a decision, so that we can find a good match, and then holding space for everybody to be human in the process. And I think to do that, it's going to require a real attitude adjustment about separating the things that are processed and can be automated and how we handle data and information and analytics and all that, which is all fantastic stuff. It empowers us to do great things.
certainly.
But then preserving the parts that are human. And at the end of the day, like if we could ever automate it, like you ask any hiring manager if they would allow a machine to select the best fit candidate for them and hire them and go through that process and all of the employer obligations and hire somebody. And the answer would be like, heck no, I'm not hiring anybody and taking responsibility for somebody I can't meet first.
Yeah.
That's the spirit of it. You have to meet them. You have to use your brain and your heart. And I finished my post the other day with like less brain, more heart.
Yeah.
That's what we need. Like the human component, it's got to come back.
100%. And like you say, hard, but also, you know, things AI can't do, right? Imagination, creativity, empathy, negotiation. These are all things that require emotions to do, like proper negotiation. And that's why, you know, that's why it can only work well between a recruiter and a candidate if both people are engaging authentically. There's amazing things that can happen. Transformative things can happen if we're open and we don't go in with this closed idea of, I got to get this and this and this out of it because that means I win. That means I win the interaction. And that I understand like all the reasons that you very eloquently enumerated. That's why we're here. But man, we all just got to drop it. I think just drop the fight and start being a lot more authentic about what we really want and who we really are. And I think that it's the time, right? We're in a period of great change and great transition. Now's the time to try that out. The stakes are incredibly low. What do you have to lose by just trying to be honest with somebody about like what you do and don't like about your job or whatever else and see what happens?
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think that, you know, one of the things that we can really do to enhance that, like a real implement today is, again, shifting that thinking to more is not better, like abundance, more of the wrong candidates. So right off the hop, if you are using metrics in your environment about how many candidates you have in your pipeline, which by the way, amassing and stacking an ATS system is not pipelining. That is not what that is.
Yeah.
That is not building a network. That does not get you any closer to hiring, because most of the time, if you've got more than one recruiter and they all get a new rec, they don't even search the candidate database first. They go straight to LinkedIn and do a keyword matrix, you know, and that's it. And the poor guy with the number one LinkedIn sort of keyword optimized profile is going to get 30 reach outs from recruiters to like
in the same day.
Job descriptions.
100%.
Oh man,
They're just bombarded and annoyed, and
yeah. So like honestly, and I think that's where it comes down to. So so free advice for everybody. When I'm reaching out to people in a very pointed way, I try to get them on the phone first. If I don't have a phone call, like a phone number for them, and it does have to be written communication, I don't start with the, hi, I came across your profile. Like, you know, and I've done that when it's commodity hiring. I do this too, because I still do, you know, larger mass emails, but I don't do masses in like 200. I do masses in like 15 at the same time. But in that case, and actually I really like your point about saying, hey, this is a mass blast, but here's why your profile, like, here's the parameters. I always tell people, based on what I can infer from what I've seen of you, is that, you know, this is my hiring thesis. here's what I'm looking for real, and here's
Yeah.
what my thesis is that you would want to come talk to me. And that is where it's like, okay, that, I generally get a very high response rate from candidates when I use that approach, because it's like, I've been thoughtful about it, and I'm not afraid to reach out to people who I've got a resume from 10 years ago. And I don't even know if you're still in the same industry, or I found your unupdated LinkedIn profile and I can see you're now here. Here's what I know about that company. Here's my thesis based on where you are now. I could be way wrong. Would love to chat anyway, because no such thing as wasted connection.
100%, 100%. I want to hit on these two comments that came in.
Sure. Yeah.
So someone here has put, how much weight does your LinkedIn profile have on your application? And I'd love to do that. But on the back of that, the next one too, from someone that I also know, was like, on top of that question, is there such thing as being too active on LinkedIn? Sidebar, are you trying to say you're tired of me, man? I am extraordinarily active on LinkedIn. So I think, I don't know. What do you think about that, Shannon? Like, how much LinkedIn action, how much does your profile weigh in your mind, or should it? And I guess, is there such a thing as being too active on LinkedIn?
Okay, so it's really interesting. I am going to speak from my lens, which is tech. And I do have to say, like, per the Stack Overflow developer survey from a couple of years ago, and they talked about social media usage amongst developers and where they identified as being the most active, LinkedIn ranked below people who are like, I'm not on social. So developers who said, I don't have social media was about 9%. And the developers who said that they're kind of active monthly, not even weekly or daily, like monthly users of LinkedIn was less than 5%. So contextualize that. So LinkedIn is not a great source of developers for me. It's just not. It's the lens that I'm in. If I see somebody who's got this like super beefy profile, they're highly responsive on LinkedIn, I have to assume they're active. And there is no problem with being active in the marketplace. Hopefully it means you're great and engaged. What it does mean is that if you start telling me that you're not active and you're not looking, and then you're likely to be one of those people who's going to be holding their cards close to their chest and then potentially springing on me that you have a counteroffer or a competing offer when we get into advanced stages. And so I'm always like, that is where I'm a little bit wary of like LinkedIn activity, LinkedIn in the technology sphere. If you're in marketing, if you're in sales, if you're in HR, and it doesn't carry any weight. I don't judge it either way. More information is good, but I also assume that you're going to have more traction on your profile because you've given more fodder to be searchable. And I think this comes down to the conversation we always have about automation, about what AI can do. It is limited by the data that candidates control. Candidate-controlled data. You cannot assume that you have a full picture of the market, of the whole entire universe, based on candidate-controlled data. You were getting a picture or a snapshot of the then present market. And I think until companies like all of the higher tech software, which is talking about like, we're just going to be so much better than everything, we can do your whole hiring process for you. That is the limitation, is that you are still dealing with an incomplete, poorly curated data set. And until privacy laws change, and until we're allowed to sort of keep records on people, without their consent, and do backdoor research and things like that on people without their consent, that's not going anywhere. So recognizing the limitations of that means that if you are on LinkedIn or I sourced you through LinkedIn on the tech ranks, I just assume you're more active even than you tell me that you are.
So. Yeah, for sure. And, I'll pop in on that question too, to an extent. I think that even before I was doing rec to rec, salespeople, for example, they'll look at your LinkedIn profile, because if you're in sales of anything, they just want to see your socials, and your LinkedIn profile should look snappy. You should have like a, some sort of current photo of yourself, right? Of your face. It should be an appropriate, cool photo for what you're doing. And It should be that you have over 500, connections, and you should have some content up there. Maybe not a ton, and your content should be relevant, right? It shouldn't be like hip hop songs of the 90s if you're selling like biotech, right? Like it should make some sort of sense. So your personal brand on LinkedIn matters there for sure. Now, I mean, in terms of activity on LinkedIn, I mean, like if you're me and you basically all of your clients are staffing agencies, all of them are on LinkedIn. So for me, it's a feedback loop of recruiterdom that can melt even the strongest of brands. But it's fun. It's just, so your activity on LinkedIn, I think whether it's too much or too little, depends on who you're targeting, right? What market are you in, and whatever, it should go up exponentially. Everybody can't be, if everyone were doing a podcast on LinkedIn like this today, then no one would be here. We'd all be on doing our own podcast. So its usefulness is based on the fact that there are some people who are just consumers and other people who are, very, very active. So yeah, I think it kind of really does depend. But maybe that's like a little subtle hint that I'm being too aggressive.
No, I don't think that is. Your audience is recruiters. So on that same component, the reason why technology professionals go on LinkedIn and why I believe there's a certain degree of activity of actively looking status required of technology professionals is because that's where all the recruiters are. So if you're a technology professional, and you need a new job, you don't go hang out on like the really ugly like Reddit forums where they get into like, technology debates and stuff like that. No, you go to where the recruiters are and you say like, hey folks, I'm active. And if you don't outwardly say that, then you at least play coy about it. But yeah, so the active monthly users, and so it's on that same basis. And I love like LinkedIn always produces, and Stack Overflow does too. And frankly, anybody who's trying to hawk recruit tech, hire tech software, they always love to do their surveys that say, here's the percentage of, developers as an example, or here's a percentage of professionals who are planning on looking for a new job this year. And the numbers are always insane. It's always 80%, 90%, and what this does is creates fear in, hiring managers. Oh my gosh, 9 out of 10 of my people are going to be leaving this year because they're looking for a new job. And it's like, no, but you have to look at the behaviors of people who would fill out surveys like that. And those are the people who are doing research in forums and areas in recruit tech. Yeah. So there's a misrepresentation. It's like of the 90% or of the 100% of people who were on your platform, 90% of them are looking for a job. That's why they're there.
That's I think that's a good point to raise too. A lot of the research, the quote unquote research that we see online is astronomically biased. Like there's no such thing anymore as surveys or whatever else that we can fully trust, that we can say, you know what, this is an accurate and full representation of what it purports to be. 9 times out of 10, whatever it's saying it is, there's disclaimer. Okay, well that's awesome. Shannon,
why don't you do one more thing? Hold on, let's just talk, because we were hitting on that, and that is the accuracy of just like the data that we have access to, and like a lot of these AI tools that are emerging. And I don't want to poo-poo them. Some of them are incredibly helpful, especially if you are dealing with certain types of recruitment. But I think if we get better and we get smarter and stop trying to go broad, let's lose this like just as broad strokes, cast a wide net, very sort of like all a volume game. Let's lose that, because if we went into sorry, I'm trying to do 2 things at once here. If we just went into the limitations of the technology we have. Oh, LinkedIn, you did the thing. Oh, heavens. I'm not going to be able to do the proof right now. I wanted to show just very quickly how many results for the location of Canada in Canada. 24 million results. So our population just hit like 40 million. Our workforce population is less than 24 million people or something like that. And not everybody has a LinkedIn profile. Yeah. So, because you have to remember there's a whole bunch of like blue collar workers, people who work in manufacturing on the oil rigs, like hunters, trappers. These are not people who have LinkedIn profiles. How do we have 24 million results of LinkedIn candidates? How many people have multiple because they aren't active? They created one, they got locked out, they created a different one. Like,
it's just not active.
It's the data quality issue that we have. And so all hire tech, as helpful as it is, it still requires your candidates to go put on the actively looking hat to subject themselves to the process of I've said this before, a virtual proctology exam that is an evaluation process to go get a job. And so if you want like passive talent, you have to build a network, and you have to take a totally different approach. And so I think as we start to see with the emergence of AI in everything, I think we'll start to see a bit of a reclamation of the things that are human. And I think coming hand in hand with that will be people who are really learning to develop those interrelational skills and the salesmanship. And I think that a lot of these gripes that we're going to see that are a product of the volume in the market from both clients and candidates and recruiters, I think that's going to start to go away. But I also think that the sphere, the market itself, like the size of the staffing industry, will probably contract to go with it. Because right now, everybody is trying to say that they can build a better mousetrap instead of just getting really real and saying, the issue you have is a human one, and it's going to take a human to fix that.
Yeah. It will contract, I think, naturally, right? Like a lot of people right now are hired into it and being discouraged. They're trying it out and they're being
Yeah.
discouraged from being themselves. They're little automatons. They're not necessarily happy. They're probably going to leave anyway. But I think that cycle will quicken because that is not the right fit for a recruiter already, or a salesperson in recruitment or whatever the case may be.
Are you seeing that a lot in the industry right now? Like when you're having conversations with both candidates and then their leader, like your candidates, so other recruiters in agency, in-house environments, in both, and then their leaders as well, that just the engagement is low? Like, is the complacency rising?
I think that there's, well, especially because the market's been super slow. So if they've managed to stick around, I think they just lose faith if they're relatively junior. A lot of these people started remote, now they're in the office, but like people who are performing well that they would learn from might not be in the office that often, or like, so it's because they've earned hybrid. It's just a big mess. I don't really envy people who started in agency recruitment post COVID or in the past couple of years. It is a big mess, but there's some people who have spectacularly great talent and who are doing okay, and hopefully they stick with it. But I think that a lot of the hires that you get at larger shops, particularly, right, they're glorified telemarketers really at first. They're just volume, and that's less attractive now with time, as AI tools can do a lot of that sourcing and whatever outreach. So I feel like that will contract. People will hire fewer recruiters just to be phone automatons or in-mail automatons, and good, I mean, in a way,
Yeah, to be able to acquire those skills of actually talking to people, of stacking that sort of like library of conversations in your brain, of like how to actually relate to people and follow your instincts and say like, I don't think this person's really engaged right now. Maybe I should just, cut her short.
People skills versus just being a phone basher, are probably going to go up. So the different hires, fewer hires, and hopefully, and I think we'll be happier for it. And it's going to be a beautiful land. There'll be no world hunger. All war will end. I mean, probably not those last things, but it'll be pretty cool.
I'm sure they play a role in it somehow. It's all related. Hip bone's connected to the knee bone, right?
100%. Well, listen, thank you everyone for being here. Thank you so much, Shannon. This was awesome. This was a great talk. We had so much juicy engagement. Hopefully we'll do even a recap on this at some point. If you have other anecdotes, other comments, please comment on the event itself after the fact. If anyone is just coming in late or had to leave early, please watch the rest of this long but very juicy episode. Okay, thank you everyone. Thanks, Shannon.
Have a good one, guys.
Bye.